verses 2 through 13. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And they appeared to them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "There is my son, beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly they looked around and saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. Then they asked him, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" He said to them, "Elijah is indeed coming to restore all things. How then is it written about the Son of Man that he is to go through many sufferings and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written about him." It's the word of the Lord for the people of God.
Thank God. So, my name is Jeremiah, and with Lang, I get to serve as chaplain here at the university. And first of all, I want you all to know, especially for those of you that are new, it's really an honor to get to do what Lang and I get to do, and that is to journey with you for these next 4 years. As chaplains for the university, that makes us the pastors for the university. But the interesting thing about campus ministry is that we only get to be your pastor if you invite us into your life. Right? This is a big university, and we don't get to pastor all 5,000 of you. So we want to serve as your pastor. We want to help guide and direct these next 4 years as you journey with God here at the university. And we do that as you invite us into your life. So one of the things that we would welcome is, first of all, in the coming weeks, that you would come and visit us in our offices. Our offices, if you go kind of around the corner here, our offices are right around the corner. And if our doors are open, you are welcome to walk on in. That's our hope, is that you will come on in. I have chocolate. Lang has candy. We want you to come and stop in. The other thing I would encourage you is that this is the one of only 2 Sunday morning services on campus of the whole year. We want you to go out and find a church. That's God's design for you while you're here at the university, is that you would ground yourself in a community of grandmas and little kids and all the people that are going to bake cookies for you, and to be grounded in a Christian community while you're here at university, in addition to hopefully participating in chapel, participating in the student organizations and so on. And so if you want help finding a church, please come see Lang and I. We know about what some of the churches are like, and we can hear what you're looking for and what you would most feed your soul right now. We want to help you connect with that. So please come see us. But I want to go ahead and we're going to get to know each other better. You're going to hear lots of stories from us, and I hope that we get to hear your stories over the next 4 years. But I want to begin with a story that actually comes from this past May, when I and a couple other faculty members and 12 university students, UIndy students, went to northern Spain for our spring term trip. We went to a walking pilgrimage, a 1,200-year-old Christian walking pilgrimage known as Camino de Santiago. And the Camino basically took us walking through the mountains of northern Spain as we journeyed towards the Cathedral of St. James. And each of us individually decided to take this trip on because we decided we wanted to grow closer to God, closer to one another, and share in this kind of common mission as we pursued Jesus together. So exactly what we had planned to happen, exactly what we had hoped to happen, did happen, and that is that we met God in Spain, or rather God met us, right? And God met us in powerful ways. God met us in the prayer times in these ancient cathedrals. God met us as we walked through the mountains. God met us in relationship with one another. was a powerful experience as we got to an intimate relationship with one another. We talked about our hopes and our dreams. We talked about our spiritual struggles. We took care of one another. Listen, when I went to do a PhD in theology, I did not know that that would mean I would be popping my students' blisters on their feet. Right? Like we just took care of each other. Okay? And it was a beautiful experience to be able to walk with God like that together. But I have to tell you that it didn't start at that level from the very first day. It wasn't like we just sort of started fully trusting one another and praying together and sharing our lives together. The first few days we just kind of walked and got acclimated to the country and so on. But there was an experience on about day 6 where we walked to the highest mountain on the entire Camino. It's the highest point on the Camino. It's known as Cruz de Ferro. And that wooden pillar that you see there has a big metal cross. You'll see it in the next image in a minute. But at the Cruz de Ferro, the highest point on the Camino, for hundreds of years, Christians have been bringing rocks. You can see some of the rocks that have been left by other pilgrims. And they lay their burdens down, symbolically lay their burdens down at the foot of the cross. And they take up the grace of Jesus Christ so that they can finish their journey. It's a beautiful image of what we're called to do every day, to lay our burdens down at the foot of the cross, to take up the grace of Jesus Christ as we journey on. And this was a powerful experience for us. Each of us, you can see 3 of the students that are there kneeling at the foot of the cross and offering their burdens to God. And then after we had that individual experience, we then kind of came down to the base of the pile of rocks there, and we had a time of prayer together. And many of the students committed their lives to Christ anew. Many of the students, some of us cried, some of us really bonded in a powerful way. We had what is often referred to as a mountaintop experience, and we were literally on the mountaintop, right? So we're on the mountaintop and had this kind of divine encounter with God and this powerful experience of one another. So then we prayed together and we moved on. Now, the story that we just heard read from the scripture was like the very first mountaintop experience. If you've ever wondered where the phrase mountaintop experience comes from, it comes from this passage of the transfiguration of Christ. So imagine that you've been walking with Jesus for years now. You've eaten meals with Him, you've listened to His teaching, you have engaged life with this community of disciples, and now He takes you up on a mountain. And it's like Jesus, the man Jesus that they had been living with, sort of like peels back His humanity. And they see Him standing there in His divine glory. Revealed as the second person of the Trinity, as God Himself. They finally see what was there all along. And it's a powerful encounter with God, greater than anything even that they had experienced as they walked with Him. And their reaction is probably a lot like your reaction and mine would be. And that was, Peter says what? Let's set up camp. Right? He's like, build the tents, build little houses. We're going to set up camp right here in the presence of God, in the divine encounter. This is what we're looking for. And so they set up camp. Some of you are settling into college, and you are still struggling with being away from family, or maybe you're struggling being away from friends, or maybe just sort of settling in can be a challenge. So some of you, I recognize that this is not yet the kind of community that you had looked for, because you're still trying to figure things out. But what I know from talking with many of you is that for many of you, this experience this week, if you came to Threshold, you've been here now for 8 or 9 days, and some of the rest of you since Wednesday, you have now begun to encounter one of those kind of mountaintop experiences, right? You've begun to trust the people that are sitting around you. You've worshiped together. You've prayed together. You've shared some of your heart for your future and your hope. Because everybody asks what your major is, right? And major is just really like a key word for what are you going to spend your life on, right? And so we began to talk about our hopes and our dreams. And And as we share those things together, many of you are having a kind of mountaintop experience. And if you haven't yet, I trust that in the coming weeks, as this community comes together, this community of disciples comes together in this place, that you're going to have that kind of mountaintop experience here. And you're going to want to set up camp. And the good news is that unlike the disciples on the Mount of Transfiguration, you do get to set up camp for a while here. That's good news. But when we were in Spain, when we had our moment kind of on the mountain, and we prayed together. That's the highest mount point on the entire Camino. So you know what happens immediately after, right? You have to start going back down. You have to start coming down the mountain. And it was about maybe a mile into that, if you can show that next image. We kind of stood along this road. We kind of came out into a clearing, and we see this beautiful mountain range that's before us. And so that's the whole group, maybe most of the group, standing there, and we're just talking, and we're looking at this beautiful mountain range and taking pictures and so on. And one of the students came up to me, Dominique. And Dominique and I had talked a little bit to this point, but not a lot. And Dominique came and she had a question. She said, you know, I laid my burdens down at the cross, and I needed to do that. That was important for me. I'm growing in my relationship with Christ, and I laid my burdens down at the cross. But she had this really great question. What do I do when I know I've laid these burdens down, but then there's this thing that happens when we get to heaven where we have to account for our sins, right? We have to sort of be accountable for the actions of our life, and how does that interact? And that's kind of a tough question to understand when we know that God has forgiven us all of our sins, and yet there's this time of accounting that we read about. And so what does that look like? And so we kind of dealt with those questions and talked through those questions. And those questions were the exact result of this encounter that we had with God on the mountaintop. And that's exactly what happens with the disciples on the Mount of Transfiguration. What happens, they have this encounter with God, they see Jesus in His divine glory, and they realize that this has all kinds of implications for what they believe about the end of the world. And so they begin asking Jesus questions about how does this work? How does this thing come together so that this God thing that we know about will work the way that from what we've just seen. So it raised these questions about how do I live my faith in light of the challenge or the what I've just seen. And Jesus responds to those questions. And Jesus responds to those questions with giving them a picture of the future. Now, what happened for us in our little community of walking group is that question, that answer, that struggling with faith invited our group into a whole time of questioning and struggling with lots of questions that we were dealing with. And so as we came down the mountain, as we made our journey down the mountain, all kinds of questions came up. We referred to it as the seminary on the way, which was kind of punny. The Camino means the way in Spanish, and so we were the seminary on the way. And we really were talking about God and faith and life and what do we do now for most of the rest of that journey. And I think most of the other groups that were on the Camino had similar experiences, that this kind of opened up a new sort of way of being with each other. That we're open to these questions, that we're struggling with these questions and trying to live out our life. Now, I want to suggest that as you come down the mountain, so to speak, metaphorically, we were literally coming down the mountain, as you come down the mountain metaphorically from these experiences that you have at college, the encounter with God that you have here, the encounter with God that you have sitting in these seats and sitting and talking with your friends in your dorms, this community and this time is going to raise all sorts of questions. And there's a temptation for you. The temptation is that you would not struggle with the questions. Because for some of you in your faith community, if you doubted your faith, if you doubted what your church believed, if you doubted what your pastor said, there was this sense that you were somehow unfaithful, right? That you weren't like doing everything that you were supposed to be doing if you doubted. And what I want to encourage you is to follow the model of those Camino pilgrims Follow the model of the disciples and bring those questions to the cross. Bring those questions to your investigation and your struggle with the faith. And believe and trust God that God is big enough, God is strong enough and true enough to withstand those deep questions. It's in the act of asking questions that we are deeply formed in the faith, that we are formed to believe more truthfully, to understand God more deeply. I want to do a little exercise real quick. If you are not a freshman, if you're a returning student, if you would go ahead and stand up for me. Okay? This is like where they hang out over here. So these are all the returning students. Now, I want you to answer honestly. If you would say that the greatest growth of your spiritual life has been in college, if your greatest time of growth of spiritual life has been in college, go ahead and raise your hand. What, about half maybe? Maybe more than half? Okay, great. Go ahead and sit down. Freshmen, I want you to see that. For more than half of them, the greatest time of their spiritual growth of their life has come since they've been in college. And for more than half of you, the greatest growth of your spiritual life is about to come. And that's an exciting time. That's an exciting thing. And part of where that's going to take place is as you struggle with these questions that are before you. You struggle to live out your faith. And what I want to tell you is this is my 7th year at the university. I've been serving as chaplain for 6 years. This will be my 7th academic year. Lane has been serving as chaplain 14 years, I believe. Is that right, Lane? 14? And so one of the things that we see people go through this process every year. Okay? And I want to tell you that it is rarely the person who questions. It's rarely the person who brings these questions honestly before God that walks away from God. People that actively question their faith and struggle with their faith are not often the ones that walk away from God. It's the ones who leave the questions be and don't struggle with those questions who become apathetic because the questions don't go away. The doubt doesn't go away. But if you don't struggle with them, then you become apathetic about your doubt. And it's easy then to walk away. It's very rare that someone comes and questions faith and doubts faith, actively doubting, and then walks away from God. I'm not concerned about that. What I'm concerned is that you would not ask the questions, that you would not trust and believe God to be big enough for the biggest doubts, the biggest struggles of your faith. Because I believe that God is big enough. And you have to press into these doubts, press into these questions with a confidence that God can withstand all of your doubt. But I want to tell you that living in these questions, requires a constant renewal of your trust. Trust is like a muscle. Okay? And when you want to get in better shape, which obviously I don't do very often, okay? But when you all want to get in shape, you have to work out, right? You have to lift. You have to do exercises. If you're an athlete, you exercise particular muscles that you know you're going to need. If you're a musician, you have to do scales and certain exercises to be able to strengthen the muscles that you need to be able to perform the task that you've been called to do. Right? And I want to suggest that trust, and specifically trusting God, is a muscle that needs to be exercised. And the way that we're going to exercise that muscle is through a constant prayer of trust. So if the student leaders could pass out those cards. And Emily, if you could go ahead and throw up that next slide. The card that we're handing around to you is the same as the slide that's up there now. My son back there is talking to me. He's not in a seat. He's hiding behind the seat. All right. I want to encourage you to allow this prayer. This is just a prayer from the Psalms. I want to encourage you to allow this prayer to be your exercise of your trust muscle. And all that takes is take this card and put it in a place that you're going to see it regularly. Use it as a Bible bookmark, post it to your bulletin board, tape it to your door, wherever you're going to see that card often. And simply pray this prayer on a regular basis. Make this the prayer of your heart, maybe each day or each morning as you rise. Offer this prayer to God. And as it says, I have put my trust in you. Actually put your trust in God. Exercise that trust that you can entrust your life, says that last phrase. You can entrust your life to the one who made you and the one that formed you. If the band would come back.